There are a lot of scientists and teachers out there that talk about amazing things in science and nature, but leave out the most important part, Hashem. What we are trying to do is give Jews science with Hashem. The Rambam teaches us in Hilchos Yesodei Torah that the way to come to Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem is by being mitbonen on His great chokhmah we find in the Bria. Many kids today find it hard to feel Hashem is constantly around them, to have emunah pashuta. To help them with this, we have a powerful tool. The Chovos HaLevos in Shara Bechina gives a mahalach to see the wisdom and kindness of Hashem, which is what the Barchi Nafshi project is all about. After introducing you to the Jewish way of learning science, we take you a tour of some of the most amazing creations in the universe. You'll learn how Hashem uses icebergs to support life in the sea ice to pump water around the entire ocean, fungi to keep the planet clean, the two super shields that protect us from deadly radiation coming from the sun, and the hidden treasures Hashem placed for us beneath the earth. Every Jew deserves to be able to learn about Niflos Avori, to learn about science and nature the Jewish way. And that is what Project Barchi Nafshi is all about. The first topic we're going to discuss is that of icebergs. And we're going to learn how Hashem uses these as giant vitamins to support life in the sea. Now, the first thing that people think of when it comes to icebergs is that they sink boats, as it happened with the famous Titanic that got sideswiped by a giant iceberg, sending it sinking to its doom. But we know that everything Hashem created in this world, there was a plan and a purpose. So our question for today is, why did Hashem make icebergs? Now, to really appreciate what icebergs do, we first really have to understand where they come from. In places that it snows in the winter, some places are very cold, there's lots of snow. So massive amounts of snow can pile up in the winter, and in fact, there's so much snow and it's so cold that even in the summer, when the snow starts to melt, not all of the ice melts. So the following year, more snow falls on top of the old ice, and this happens year after year after year until you have these giant blocks of ice that can be 1 kilometer tall and 1,000 kilometers long. We call them glaciers. Glaciers are truly massive blocks of ice. Now, just to get an appreciation of how big these glaciers could be, this is a helicopter ride over Taylor Valley in Antarctica, where you're getting a picture of just how big one of these massive blocks of ice can be, one of these glaciers. Now, in addition to being massive, the glaciers are constantly moving. They can move from anywhere between 50 meters a year to 50 meters a day. They move over a small, thin stream of water that forms underneath them, and they move by the force of gravity as they slide. And as they're sliding over the ground, something extraordinary happens on the ground beneath them. The water that's flowing seeps into the rocks, and it's very, very cold, especially in the winter, so the water freezes and it expands. If you ever put a full bottle of water or something in the freezer overnight, you noticed in the morning that it exploded. The same thing happens with this ice. It's because when water freezes, it gets bigger, it expands. So the water that seeped into those rocks freezes, expands, and when it expands, it plucks out rocks from the ground. It's called the plucking. Now, as these rocks get plucked out of the ground, they start moving with the glacier, and then they run into other rocks, and then they push those rocks, and more rocks actually get pushed and pumped into these giant glaciers, these giant blocks of ice, and they're transported as they go. Now, in addition to the rock plucking method, the sheer force of these great glaciers, they literally bulldoze their way across the surface of the earth, crushing virtually everything in their path. They can actually put holes in mountains and totally transform the surface of the earth. The whole time, they're crushing more and more rocks. More and more minerals are getting pumped in to the giant block of ice. Now, as glaciers are constantly moving, some of them eventually make their way towards the ocean. in which case little tiny pieces of these giant glaciers fall into the water, in which case an iceberg is born. That's really what icebergs are. They're little pieces of these giant glaciers that fall into the water. And what you watched right now is the formation of an iceberg. Now, the reason why they fall into the water, when the glaciers were on the land, the massive blocks of ice had a bedrock to rest on. But as they slowly move their way out over the water, it's only a matter of time until something has to give. What you're witnessing is a massive iceberg in the making. Now, icebergs are actually called icebergs. It's a Dutch word. It means ice mountain, and it's because they're extremely large. They can be 55 stories tall above the surface of the water, which is literally the tip of the iceberg. If you've ever heard that expression, it comes from icebergs, because only 10% of the ice actually above the water, 90% is underneath the water. Just to get an idea of how big these can be, it would approximately be the size of 5 Empire State Buildings, one on top of the other. That's a true mountain of ice. So, what do icebergs do? Why did Hashem make them? What does he use his giant blocks of ice for? Well, it has to do with vitamins. Everybody knows you gotta take your vitamins. You need basic nutrients to be healthy, to survive, and to thrive. In fact, if somebody is not feeling well and they go to the doctor, one of the first things the doctor will ask them is to take a blood test. Because if somebody's missing one essential mineral, such as iron, they are not going to be healthy. Their bodies won't function properly. All forms of life work the same way, including these creatures. We call them phytoplankton or algae. Now, in the ocean, there's no plants. In place of plants, Hashem made algae. They do the same thing as plants in that they're able to harness the energy from the sun to produce food. So they make food, and they are the base of what we call the food chain or a food web in the ocean. Little fish eat the algae, and then bigger fish eat the little fish, and then bigger fish eat those fish, in which case eventually they're essentially supporting all life in the ocean, these algae. Now, while we don't have much in common with these algae, one thing we do have in common is that they also need to take their vitamins. There's basic minerals such as iron that the phytoplankton need in order to grow, survive, and thrive. So where do these algae normally get their vitamins from? They normally get it from rivers. Minerals are found in rocks, such as iron, and when the water from rivers flows over the rocks, the minerals go into the water, and that water eventually makes its way and spills into the sea, carrying with it the essential minerals that these algae need to grow, survive, and support life in the sea. Now, there's a bit of a problem in places where it's extremely cold, because there's no flowing water, there's no rivers. However, for Hashem, that's no problem. He made icebergs to replace rivers. The whole time those glaciers were bulldozing their way over the surface of the earth, they were getting pumped with massive amounts of minerals. As the icebergs fall one after the other into the ocean, they sail their way across the icy seas, releasing those essential minerals, those nutrients to support the algae and to support life in the ocean in the North and the South Pole. That's really what icebergs are. They're giant vitamins to support life in the sea. To appreciate this is an infrared photograph. There's different ways of taking pictures. Some with the eye like we see, and others with other ways of seeing. So this infrared image is of a giant iceberg 50 kilometers long. The yellow and the red that you see in the picture are signs of algae growth, photosynthetic activity taking place, and you'll notice there's a flourishing of algae growing following the giant iceberg. The reason is because they got their vitamins. They got the nutrients they need to survive and thrive. That's what icebergs are. They're giant vitamins to support life in the sea. We say every day, Poteach et yadecha umasbia l'kol chai ratzon. What we're looking at with icebergs is the awesome power of Hashem. We're looking at the incredible way that He supports His creatures in this world, in a place where it was impossible to give them the nutrients they need because there's no flowing river, there's no flowing waters. For Hashem, it's no problem. He'll make vitamins the size of mountains, which is what icebergs are. It's upon us to appreciate this great aspect of creation, this incredible and brilliant invention of Hashem to support life in the ocean, in the North and the South Pole.